Hello, students. I hope everyone's doing okay as we are about to get a big winter weather front, which is why our class was canceled today. I am instead going to be recording this lecture. I would have done this when we were together on Microsoft Teams. I'm going to go over some basic ideas around contour line drawing, and this is going to prepare us for our next series of drawings that we are completing that are around the idea of starting to draw from observation. So far in this class, we've focused on non-objective imagery like lines, shapes, color, those elements of art, variety, repetition, movement, those principles of design. And now we're going to get into actually drawing what we see in front of us. And this series of drawings that we're going to be doing for the next week are going to be almost like warm-up drawings. So don't consider them like finalized, finished projects, but rather they're going to be a series of drawings that are going to prepare us for drawing for our next unit. In our next unit, we're going to be doing a more fully rendered still life drawing. And for this first unit, for this linear movement unit, we're only going to start to warm up a little bit to drawing from observation. And then we're going to jump into things like value for our next unit, which is going to be like shading and things like that. So for the purposes of today, we are focusing only on line drawing, which we also call contour line in drawing. So we're not going to be filling in any shading. We're only using lines and mostly outlines. So I'm going to start with a lecture that's going to go over some basic elements of art, some basic key concepts that are going to get us started for our series of drawings. And then I'm going to explain to you how to actually create the drawings. And we're going to be doing those at home to be uploaded for next Wednesday by the end of the day, and hopefully to be able to bring in on our class for next Thursday. I will keep you updated in terms of if our class next Thursday is going to be either in person or remote. I have not heard an update yet, but once I do, I will send out an announcement. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so you heard me say the word contour drawing a few times. The way that we would define that would be to describe edges and volumes through simple lines. So here on the left, we have a contour drawing of a plant, and on the right, we have a contour drawing of a person. This is simply defining whatever it is we're drawing through those edges. Any kind of volume or three-dimensional reference is going to be defined through just the line. So there are a few different types of ways that we start to learn about drawing from observation. And one of the main reasons why we try to learn this way that I'm about to explain is that traditionally, when we draw objects, so whether it be that I'm drawing a mug right in front of me, or I'm even drawing my own face. So if you're drawing anything from observation, so not just really objects, we tend to want to draw what we think we see versus what we actually see. So it's very psychological. It's not unusual for a student, for example, to do a self-portrait where they draw themselves and they tend to draw themselves how they want to look versus how they actually look. It's very psychological. When we draw a mug, we would draw the mug how we think a mug looks and actually literally focusing on the mug. So we have to break ourselves of this habit of trying to draw what we think we see versus what we really see. And the exercises that we're going to be doing in this next series of drawings are going to try to retrain our brain to draw what we actually see. And one of the methods that we do is, again, it's like an exercise to warm our brains up, is what's called a continuous contour drawing. And this continuous line drawing is when you are forcing yourself to draw something, in this case, a flower, where we don't pick up our pencil. So we use just we keep the tip of our pencil on the paper the entire time we're drawing, which sounds kind of crazy, but the goal of this is to train our eyes to look more at the object than our actual paper. Because when we draw what we think we see, we tend to hardly even look at the object and we focus more on looking down at our drawing. Another method that we use to help retrain our brain is what we call a blind contour drawing. A blind contour line drawing is when we literally don't allow ourselves to look down at our paper at all. And it will result in what this looks like, a really ridiculous drawing, right? We are really learning how to only can look at the object that we're drawing instead of looking down at our paper. We, for our series of drawings this week, are going to try both of these strategies. And I'm going to show you some examples in a little bit here. So one of the reasons why contour drawing is so important to the process of drawing from observation is that it teaches us to draw from general to specific. So let's say we're drawing a plant. If we're going to draw a plant, we don't want to start with just one leaf of the plant and then draw all of its little bit of details, right? All of its textures and its value. Because what if we spent all of that time on that little leaf and then we realized that that leaf was completely out of proportion to the other leaves we were drawing? To draw an effective drawing that looks realistic from observation, we want to draw a general contour line drawing of it first. This is what we call general to specific. So we start with this basic line drawing here on the left. Then we start to add in more of the details like the textures. And then eventually we're going to have a more fully rendered drawing. In the steps of general to specific, we are going to be focusing on the general part for these drawings, which is going to be like that drawing on the left, where we're just drawing the basic outline. We're not getting into any details or value yet. We want to talk about what do we really mean by line when we're talking about drawing? Because drawing really isn't necessarily a line, but rather mark making. It is marks that we are creating with our pencil. So even though for the continuous line drawing and the blind contour line drawing, where we're kind of forcing you to keep your pencil on the paper to create a continuous line, really what we're drawing or doing in drawing is mark making, which is a series of marks to create. Another way of looking at this would be like, have you ever seen someone sketch something out? When they're sketching, they're kind of drawing really quickly and their pencil is really quickly like kind of hitting back and forth as it renders the object that they're drawing. And that idea of sketching is what we call in drawing the term gesture. So gesture is the essence of form and movement rather than a really detailed description of it. And gesture or sketching is the first step of that general part of drawing when we're doing general to specific. So it's really more quick. And the reason why it's quick is that's another way that we train our brain to really focus on what we see versus what we think we see. We're going to kind of really quickly draw it out in a way to kind of say, okay, if I'm drawing, like, for example, those plants on the left-hand side, as I'm drawing them, I'm going to get a sense of their proportion. Are their sizes accurate? Am I actually really drawing something that I see versus what I think I see? When we draw this way, we're drawing much more quickly and we're getting a general essence of what it is we're drawing. That's the gesture. And when we're doing gesture through mark making, we are sort of doing the rough draft or the first steps to the drawing. And in a lot of cases, we're going to end up erasing out some of that gestural form to kind of say, you know what, that leaf or petal looks a little off. I'm going to erase it and start it over again. So it's very much a process to draw. Another term that you've already heard me mention here a couple times that is really important to drawing from observation is proportion. So there's two different terms that kind of hang out in this realm of proportion that we can get confused about. So I want to have them out here very clearly. A lot of times when we say proportion, sometimes we're thinking of actual scale. So what scale really is the relative size of one object to another. So if we're looking at the scale of this block next to the scale of this little man, that is the scale. It is our comparison of the size of one object to another. Next to the Eiffel Tower looks very tall next to the scale of a person. Proportion is when we're looking at the relative size of parts to a whole. Proportion is much more comprehensive. So if I'm looking here at this still life drawing of a lobster, because why not? I am really thinking about the size comparisons of everything in the composition. So not only the size comparisons of the objects, like the decanter and the glass and the shell and the lobster, I'm also thinking about all of the proportion of that negative space around it. So whether that be the negative space in the background or the table itself, you can use the sort of laws of proportion, again, sort of comparing the parts of a whole, as a way to draw a more accurate drawing of something from observation. Just putting these sort of lines into the composition helps you to allow yourself to almost look at like it as measuring, right? So for example, if I look at the decanter here on the right-hand side, I'm going to see that the little blue line that's from its top to its bottom, I can kind of compare that length, that vertical length to the vertical length of that glass behind it. And I can say, okay, if I'm looking at that length of the decanter, I can see that it's a little bit taller vertically than the glass. So I'm going to draw it that way. That size comparison is very important when we're drawing a still life or an object that's in front of us, which is what we're going to be doing for our next few series of drawings. So you heard me mention that we can focus on drawing the negative space. So what do I mean by this idea of positive and negative space? Well, typically when we refer to positive and negative space in art, the positive space is whatever's making up whatever it is we're drawing from observation. So for example, the positive space of this drawing on the left-hand side is the chairs, whereas the negative space is going to be the white area around the chairs. Positive and negative space is a really great tool for drawing from observation. And one way to look at it, if we look at the one on the right, this is called an inverted positive and space drawing, where the person drew this is like a plant. They drew the plant and then they inverted the positive and negative space. So the positive space is the white and the negative space is the black. And the reason why you do this is that this is another trick. This is another exercise that we use to train our brains to try to draw what we actually see versus what we think we see. We can look at the negative space as an indicator of what to draw, just as much as we can look at the object itself. So for example, if I'm looking at this still life, I can look at the headphones, right? And the headphones themselves, let's look at the shape of the overall headphones. So if we start at the bottom of the headphones, we see the earpiece, and then we move up the band that goes around the head that takes us down to the other earpiece. Between that band that goes up over the head, I see a shape that is created within sort of the negative space between the bands. When I'm drawing, I can mentally sort of switch my positive and negative space to say, instead of mentally trying to draw the headphones, I can try to mentally draw that negative space I see. When we do that, we typically tend to draw more efficiently and we tend to draw more realistically in terms of proportion and in terms of drawing what we really see versus, again, what we think we see. So if I were to move over to this wine bottle here, and then this little man has his hands up like he's real strong. I'm sure it's a cartoon character. I just don't know his name. If I look on the right-hand side of this bottle, and then I look at his sort of chest and waist area, there's a shape that's created in the negative space. As a drawer of this still life, I could say, you know what, I'm going to draw that shape I see in the negative space. That's going to make a much more effective drawing. And typically what drawing from observation really is in practice is kind of going back and forth. So I might draw the bottle first, and then I might draw the little man next to it. But then I might say, okay, is my negative space as accurate as my positive space? So a lot of what we do is kind of going back and forth. That's why it's so helpful to do this inverted space drawing, like this one drawing here on the right with the white and the black, because it helps to train our brain to look at the negative space as well as the positive for drawing itself. Okay, so a few other things to think about as we start to really want to draw accurate scale and proportion in our still life drawings. So for example, we can use lots of different tools. Here we can use a pencil. So I already kind of showed you some ideas of comparing between scale and that last side where I talked about the difference between the decanter and the glass and the fact that I knew the decanter was a little taller than the glass, so I knew I could draw it taller. But if I'm looking here in terms of scale and proportion, I can use my pencil. So typically if we're drawing a still life, we'll have it in front of us. I can hold my pencil up like here in the photo, and I can measure in my own sort of way. I can look and say, okay, the tip of the pencil goes at the top of the apple. And then where my finger hits at the bottom of the apple, that's about as tall as the apple is. And then I can move my pencil over to the next object I'm drawing, which is sort of this blue glass. And I can see that if I compare the length of where my thumb rests on the pencil, that the glass is actually much taller than the apple. And I can get more of an accurate depiction of how tall the glass is in scale or proportion to the apple. So here on the right-hand side, you can see how that proportion could be measured out. Whereas the apple is about seen as 1/4 of a whole, and the neck of the glass is seen as 1/3 parts of the whole. So we can get really nitty gritty with the math here. We don't have to though, trust me, I hate math just as much as many artists do, but we can use it to our advantage when trying to sort of measure things out. Another really helpful tool with drawing from observation is what we call the clock angle tool. Typically, when we draw a still life, we're going to end up with lots of angles, especially if we're drawing anything that's more of a geometric shape, like a book, for example. And we want to get accurate angles. That's one of the most important things about really drawing what we actually see versus what we think we see. Typically, we know a book is rectangular, right? So we'll draw it like a rectangle. But when a book is resting upon a countertop, it's what's called foreshortened. And when it becomes foreshortened, it's not really a rectangle anymore, right? It's this kind of oblong shape that happens, like here in this drawing. So one way that we can get an accurate depiction of the angles in our drawings, in our still lifes, is using what we call the clock angle tool. Now, I know a lot of us don't really use these types of clocks anymore. Most of us are used to the digital clock on our phone, but hopefully you're familiar with this type of clock. So we can hold our pencil up in front of us and we can tilt our pencil to the angle of the object that we're drawing. And we can say, okay, I'm taking I'm taking my pencil, I'm rotating it, and I'm going to kind of try to rotate it right on the same line that the book rests on. And I can see that that line is at 4 o'clock on the clock angle, or on the clock. So that when I draw it, I can do the same thing. I can envision a clock and I can draw it at 4. That way you're capturing the most effective angle. We're going to review this again when we get more into still life drawing. I just want to start to introduce this idea. Don't get too hung up on it for your initial drawings that we're going to be doing. Here's just another example of how that clock angle tool is done, where you take the actual pencil, you hold it in front of you, you kind of figure out what time it is, and you can see here that this person drew out what time it was for each one of their angles. So something you could practice at home and play around with if you would like. Another really helpful way to determine scale and proportion in a still life is to think about something within a perceptual grid. So the term perceptual means sort of perceived in our mind, okay? A grid is going to be anything that's on an XY axis. So we can think about our still life objects within a grid, within a cube, right? Amongst a grid. And maybe you've even seen grid drawings before where someone will draw a grid over something, like over a piece of paper, and you'll draw it that way. This is the same concept, that we know that if some things are going to be within an XY axis, like within a cube here on the left-hand picture, we can help to say, okay, I know that that object on the left-hand side is going to be, its lines are going to be on this sort of XY axis. It helps you to sort of visually interpret your objects. And another way to look at it would be back at this slide here. This is a really great example where we see the red line and the blue line and the black line. That is using perceptual gridding to try to figure out the proportion of the objects. So not only their proportion within scale as compared to one another, but also within the proportion of those relative size of parts to a whole, how they are all working together between that positive space of the objects and that negative space of the area around them. All right. So those are sort of our tools in our toolbox for drawing objects. But now we're going to think about too that eventually, and we're not going to get too hung up on this again for these next series of drawings. So I'm just trying to introduce the idea of composition. So we've already talked a lot about composition in our first linear movement drawing, where we talked about focal point, we talked about cutting things off, we talked about the idea that if a little person were to jump into your drawing, where would they start? Where would they look first? And then how would they move around? That could be through implied line, that could be through rhythm and movement, right? So these are things that we've already learned. But when we are drawing a still life, we're not just going to try to draw the objects right lump in the middle of our composition, like here on the left-hand side, because we already know that if we draw something like the focal point right in the middle of the composition, we're going to get stuck there. Your little person's going to be hanging out in the middle. They're not going to know where to go. Instead, we're going to be considering cropping our still life. We're going to have things off center and asymmetrical like we did for our first drawing. We're going to think about where could, for example, our focal point be? And in this case, I see the dragon as the focal point. Where are we going to crop things off so that we have visual resting points? So that cropping is a useful tool in drawing from observation, just as much as it was when we were drawing in that non-objective way for our first drawing. And one way that we are able to draw an effective composition is through using a viewfinder. And when we come back together in class, hopefully soon, we're going to create these together. A viewfinder is taking a piece of paper and cutting basically a 4-inch by 3-inch hole out of the middle of the paper. And you can use that viewfinder to hold it up in front of you with your still life objects in front of you to find the best way to crop them. And again, we'll go over this a little bit more later. I just want to introduce you to the basic idea of the term. And there's an example of what that would look like. All right, so for our next series of drawings, we're going to be creating 4 different drawings. And these 4 drawings are going to be more like exercises. They're not going to be fully rendered or finished drawings like we did for our first linear movement drawing. Instead, we are trying to train our brain to draw what we actually see versus what we think we see when drawing an object. So look at these as drawings that are retraining your brain. They're exercises. So what you're going to do for your first set is you're going to take that big drawing paper pad that you bought for this class, and you're going to rip out a piece of paper out of it, and you're going to fold it in half. And you're going to fold it in half, what we would call hamburger style, where you have sort of like, you're going to fold it in half where it's not going to be narrow, but rather like a wider. Hopefully that makes sense. So that you have 2 drawings that are 9 inches by 12 inches long. If for some reason you didn't buy a big 18 by 24 inch paper pad, but you bought a smaller one, you can just use 2 separate pieces of paper. This is not an exact science here. Okay, so when we fold that in half, we're going to have 2 sort of areas where we can draw, right? Both are 9 inches by 12 inches. On the first, left-hand side, we're going to be drawing a continuous line drawing of our objects that we selected. We're going to choose one of the objects out of the 3. And then we're going to draw a blind contour drawing. We'll choose one of our other objects. So again, you should have had 3 objects that you were intending on drawing. I want you to draw 2 different objects for these 2 sets of drawings. So let's look at this, okay? Let's look at an example of this so we're not feeling stressed out here, okay? I just want to show you someone doing a continuous line drawing. So these are going to be quick, okay? So you could even time yourself. If you tend to get like hung up on things and overanalyze things, giving yourself a time limit can be very helpful. You might set your clock for like 10 minutes, and you're going to take one of your objects that you chose, and you're going to use, for this, I would like you to actually use pencil. I know that in the video she's using Sharpie. Please, I want to start practicing using pencil, but if for some reason that's all you have is a Sharpie, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so as you can see, as she is drawing this vase, you can see that she is not lifting the tip of her drawing instrument. So that is not being, so it is our sort of human nature to want to pick it up, right? And sketch it out and use that gestural type drawing. But we are trying to really train our brain to really focus on that object. And through not lifting our pencil, we are kind of forcing ourselves to do that. So it's going to look wonky. It's going to have funky lines everywhere, and that's all right. That's the point of it, okay? So the number one rule here for the continuous contour drawing is that we cannot lift the tip of our pencil. So you are just sort of going to think about, how can I define the contour of the object? So that's going to be its sort of edges, and it's three-dimensional. So she's using kind of like a funky little fun, like swirly line on that bottom right-hand portion to try to show a little bit of the form. Now she does get a little bit into using value. I don't want to do that for our drawings. I want you to sort of stop it here where we don't see value. I want you to have it just a basic outline of the object itself, all right, to describe the object. Okay, so for blind, you are going to have it even wonkier. It's going to look even crazier, okay? You are going to not allow yourself to look down at your paper or your pencil or your hand. You only can look straight at your object. And that is going to result in a really crazy, messed up drawing. Now, some people find it helpful to make their blind contour drawing also continuous, where they don't lift their pencil, but you are allowed to lift your pencil here if you would like to. And it's going to look really silly. It's going to look really off. And that's the point of it. It's, again, just to train you to look more up at your object than down at your paper while you're drawing your paper. Okay. So a blind one is going to look really weird because your lines aren't going to even connect, and that's okay. So again, we are using the right side of our folded paper to do this. It's going to be right beside your continuous drawing. Or if you have a smaller paper pad, you can rip out one piece of paper for the contour, continuous contour, and you could rip out another piece of paper for this blind. But I want to point out that I want these drawings to be at least 9 inches by 12 inches. And I also want you to make sure that as you draw your object, you don't draw it super tiny in the middle of your composition. Take up the whole paper. You're going to draw the actual object pretty large. So for example, here, this artist is really working hard to fill up their whole paper with the vase. If we look here, this artist who is drawing the roller skate, kind of look at the proportion of the scale of the skate to the person's hand. That, I want you to get that big. Don't draw it super teeny tiny. Take up as much of the paper as you can to draw the object. So likely you're drawing the object even bigger than it really is in real life. All right. So those are your first 2 drawings. Those are going to be quick. Those should not take you more than 10 minutes. Okay, so time yourself if you need to. Then we're going to be doing a third exercise drawing that I call repetition and movement. And this is going to take up one big piece of paper of your drawing paper pad. So my preference is that you use your 18 by 24 inch drawing paper pad, you rip out a piece of paper and you use the whole piece. But if you have a smaller paper pad, just rip out a piece of paper and use the paper you have, but you need to fill up the whole paper. And what you're going to do, you're going to choose your third object that you selected, and you are going to draw that object repeatedly up to 6 times. So I want you to draw the object at least 6 times. And you're going to draw the object with different viewpoints. So in the drawings of the objects themselves should only be using contour line. So just the basic outline. I don't want to see any texture. I don't want to see any value. These are 2 examples of what I mean. So you're going to draw the object in different variations. So you might draw the object upside down. You might draw the object on its side. You might change where you are looking at the object. So you might move. You might draw it from bird's eye view, from worm's eye view. And you don't need to be worrying too much about your overall composition here. This is just an exercise to get us to start to practice this contour-like drawing. But as you are drawing your different views of your object, as you move it around and repeat it, I want you to make sure that you are really trying to focus your brain on drawing what you actually see versus what you think you see. So a majority of your time should be spent looking at the actual object and not down at your paper as you draw it. So these 3 drawings, so come back here, the continuous line drawing, the blind line drawing, both contour drawings, and the repetition and movement drawing are all going to be due at the end of the day next Wednesday. So they need to be finished by then. You'll upload 3 different pictures of those 3 different drawings. But we are going to do a 4th drawing as well. And that drawing is going to be due the next day. It's going to be due in class on Thursday. So your 4th drawing is going to be an inverted space drawing. And again, look at these as exercises. This is not a drawing to get stressed out about. You're going to do a rough gestural sketch of an object with pencil. So in this case, a student used like a feather or a plant or a chandelier. And sometimes for this drawing, it helps to zoom in a bit on the object. So you don't have to draw the whole object. You can just draw a portion of it if you would like. But the object that you select for this can be out of your 3 objects that you were going to bring in, or this can be a new object that you find somewhere in your house. You want the object itself to naturally have some negative space, right? So that the inversion of the drawing actually works. And this drawing can be on any of your papers. It can be in your sketchbook or from your drawing paper pad, but it needs to be at least 8 inches by 8 inches. So as you can see, this is going to be a little bit smaller. And that's because I don't want you to spend too much time on it. It's meant to just be an exercise. So you're going to start with a pencil drawing of your object first. So I'm going to show you a little video of someone doing this so you can see what I'm talking about. Let me fast forward. Okay, so you can see that this person is drawing a stool. And instead of focusing on drawing the stool itself, they are drawing the negative space with a pencil very lightly. That's exactly what I want you to do for this drawing. Okay, so you're going to pick an object and you're going to draw its negative space lightly with a pencil. And that's what this video is for, just to show you that. Then after you've drawn the essence of the negative space so that you draw it and you're like, oh, okay, now I can see that stool. Then you're going to go in and you're going to fill it in with a Sharpie. But I'm going to stop talking now so you can kind of watch her. So this is very gestural, very quick drawing. It's not meant to take too much time, so don't get too hung up. If you need to time yourself, that's fine too. But she is drawing the negative space. And again, the purpose of this is one more tool in our toolbox to help us draw an effective object from observation. Because the negative space in terms of proportion and size and all of those things is just as important as drawing the positive space. And like I said, in drawing from observation, we're typically going to go back and forth between drawing positive and drawing negative space. So once that whole stool will be drawn out, I'm going to fast forward it a little bit. You can start to see it becomes a stool, which is pretty cool. And then for purposes of our drawing, our 4th drawing, you are then going to fill in the space around your object black. And this is your inverted space drawing. This drawing is due next Thursday. We're going to hopefully look at it in class for our critique, but I can't promise you we're going to be in class. We'll see what we do, but you need to have it done regardless. And we're going to look at these 4 drawings I just explained to you and our linear movement drawing that we just finished and turned in on Tuesday. We're going to look at them all together for a little class critique. All right, so I'm going to exit out of this PowerPoint really quick, and I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right, so you should be able to see my screen now. Let me make sure that's working. Okay, and I'm going to show you Blackboard really quick. Sorry, that's my email. I hope this is working. If for some reason I'm worried it's not, but I'm going to keep going and hope for the best. All right, so just to show you logistically, so this lecture that I just gave and all the videos that I showed you are under our linear movement course materials folder. So if you need to go back and look, you can. I also want to show you that this linear movement overview document is here. You can download this document and it's going to have the grade rubric I'm going to be using for your linear movement drawing and for this series. So this was the linear movement drawing was the first drawing we did that we turned in Tuesday. And then this down here is how I'm going to grade these 4 drawings that you're creating. And here I also have a summary of like their dimensions that I want and what material I want you to use. So that that's there, okay, to use pencil versus Sharpie. So for your first 3 drawings, you're going to obviously use pencil. And then for that 4th drawing, the inverted space drawing, you'll use Sharpie, okay? But you'll start with pencil and then you'll use Sharpie. So that's all here for you. And then you also, for turning in your first 3 drawings, the continuous line, the blind line, and the repetition and movement drawing, you're going to go to our discussion boards. And you're going to click on discussion board number 4. And this is where you're going to upload those 3 photos. You're going to upload the 3 photos of those what I call the warm-up drawings and the repetition and movement drawings. And then you're going to answer these questions about your progress. Okay. And then a reminder that the inverted space drawing will be due in class that next day, that Tuesday. So originally these first 3 drawings were going to be due Tuesday, but I'm extending that out to Wednesday since we have this weird weather day. So those of you who do need to come to campus to work will have Monday through Wednesday to do so. All right. So I know that was a lot. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I'm happy to clear anything up about what's going to be due. You can always send me an email. We can always set up a one-on-one meeting if we need to do that as well. All right, well, I hope everyone stays safe and warm and healthy out there. And I'll look forward to talking to you next Thursday. But in the meantime, make sure you're looking out at your announcements for updates about whether we'll be back in person versus virtual and any other reminders for what's going to be due. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.